Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Philosophical Liberal. I'm your co-host and co-founder of 1776 Forward, Chris, and I've got Joia with me as always as we continue our deep dive into our statement on philosophical liberalism. For those of you who know, this will be a little bit of a rehash, but for those of you who are just tuning in and learning about us for the first time, we are systematically going through the statement that's on our website, 1776forward.com, on philosophical liberalism, our creed that we are all about. And we are in Article 2, which is the meatiest and biggest section of our three-part or three-article statement. And it's all about, well, not all, but the bulk of it is about the virtues. And so under this new format where we are going to cover one virtue a month, two-part series for each of the 11 virtues that are outlined in that statement, we are now on to part two of our first virtue, responsibility, which we're not going to, just so you know, as a preview for what's to come, we're not going to be going in order that the virtues are listed on the statement. But we did start with the first one that is the first one listed. And even within this, and within the statement, I would say the virtues don't necessarily follow any type of order, but insofar as there is any one virtue that's probably most important, it is this one of responsibility. And that's partly why Joy and I even decided to take this one on, because as another preview in the future months, episodes and discussions on virtue, we're going to be talking with other people who are going to help us bring to life and exemplify this virtue. So that's kind of a new format and new treat you have to look forward to. But this one really is kind of what we're calling the spine of not only character, but of also our ideal of the core virtues for a philosophically liberal citizen in a free society, which is a good way to summarize what that list of 11 virtues in our statement is all about. So um, and just as one more preview and treat for all of you, that phraseology even of responsibility as the spine of virtues or character, that comes from an opus that Joy and I are currently thick in the throes of co-creating. It's a co-created opus on greatness, the third and final, and I guess you could say highest of our three core values that we've gone through earlier in this series. So that's just a plug, even for those of you who are new and want to go backwards. Look for our mini series on the three core values, kind of at the start of this Substack, freedom, flourishing, and greatness. And we talked even once we got to greatness about how it is kind of the crown of the three and kind of follows from the other two. And in the course of even us creating this series and this deep dive on our statement, Joy and I have just really come to see how much we have to say on greatness. You'll recall, for those of you who did see that two-part expounding on that value, that we really felt that was our most original contribution to the discourse on those three values and ideas and concepts. And so we have just continued to develop that out in our own work. And it has morphed into this grand opus, which we're really excited to share with you all very soon. It will definitely be this year and not late in this year, but within the next couple months. And um, I guess the relevance here is that we, so one of, you've already seen, we outlined kind of in our theory of greatness, our planks of it. The opus is going to expand upon that. I think at the time had 7 planks plus one meta principle, and it's now grown beyond that. So more to come on that front. But one of them, even in the original theory we outlined last year, was what we called prime mover responsibility and character leadership. So actually, you know what? That wasn't in the original. That was it was part of the meta principle.
Yes.
It was responsibility and freedom were kind of combined into one. Um, we've since broken it out into what we're calling prime mover responsibility and character leadership. Um, so once again, even there, responsibility has a kind of starring role, even in our ideal of greatness. So there's going to be a lot more to come, but today's discussion is really to deepen upon what we introduced in last week's episode on responsibility and this first virtue. And I thought, therefore, I'm getting to the point. I thought, therefore, because it features so prominently in both of our works, our statement on philosophical liberalism and now our master theory of greatness, that we could maybe open today's discussion with an exploration of this phrase, prime mover responsibility. And for those of you who don't know, she really coined this term a long time ago in our works and just collaborations. And so I thought I would start off by giving you the floor to explain how did you come to that phrase? Because I love it. I think it just has such emotional power and resonance uh and it's poetic, but it's also very descriptive. And so I would just love for you to refresh my memory and then give everyone out there the first kind of understanding of what you mean by that and what it can help us understand about this virtue of responsibility.
Sure. And so I'll just point out that our audience can come to expect that in our future explorations of the different virtues, we will be bringing on different experts. But here, I really did think that we really did have something not only original, but incredibly important to say about responsibility. So I did feel it was upon us to take responsibility for presenting this idea of responsibility and even giving you the little preview of what to expect in this grand opus that we are creating. So, to this idea of prime mover responsibility. So, here I have to admit, I really was inspired by Ayn Rand, who clearly herself was inspired by Aristotle. So, this concept of the prime mover, that was even his metaphysics, and not one that neither she nor I, or I think anybody in the modern world now, takes literally as how the physics of our astronomy works. I don't think anybody currently believes there is a prime mover. But as a piece of poetry, I think you're right that it is beautiful, and it really is an important point, and one that I think is incredibly overlooked in thinking about her opus, which was this book, Atlas Shrugged. And here's my very old dog-eared copy.
Mm.
And for all the disagreements that I have with the book, this is the thing that I think she gets spot on, beautifully, importantly correct, and it's the thing that like nobody talks about. So
You
many
mean
people
about
when
Atlas
they
Shrugged?
about Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
So many people, when they talk about Atlas Shrugged, talk about it as a political novel, and of course, politics is part of it for the same reason that freedom is part of our project of freedom, flourishing, and greatness. And I did want to add that we really have now decided to focus on greatness, not only because it is the most original, which I think it is, but in my estimation, because it is the most important. If it is what allows you and I and other people to live lives of greater greatness, that is, I think, the most important contribution we can make to our own lives and to humanity at large. So it's definitely, I think, why we're giving this all of our focus and attention. And so, for everyone who thinks that Atlas Shrugged is just a political novel, it is about much more than that. It in fact, is perhaps a statement of greatness. There are other people who would mention that it is a book about the mind, about reason. Ayn Rand herself made the point that by time she was writing this novel, she came to understand that what distinguished humanity was the faculty of reason, the importance of the mind, that that's what this book is about. But significantly, it's not just the mind in terms of grand theories and an ivory tower. In fact, one of the greatest villains in this book is an individual who is a theoretical scientist who is not interested in the practical engineering technology applications of his theories and just wants to stay in his ivory tower. And it leads to all sorts of bad consequences, which, if you don't know, you can find out in the book. So, what is the book really about? And so, if you know anything about the book, you might know that it opens with a question that is the question that animates the book, which is the question: who is John Galt? What is the answer to who is John Galt? Well, interestingly, in my copy of this, and I wanted to bring this to you, so when you open the very first page, there's this kind of a description of what the book is going to be all about. And at the very top here, you probably can't read it, but in bold letters here, there's another question, which is the question that I think really gets us to the answer. And the question is, what moves the world? And I think thinking about this, what moves the world, really gets us to the answer of who is John Galt. Now, you might know Ayn Rand's project, her purpose, her mission in life, as she understood it, was to understand and project the ideal man. And I have a whole presentation that someday I will kind of write up of different stages I think that she went through in her development over the course of her career, and to answer who is the ideal man? What is the ideal man? Who is John Galt? And significantly, I think the most profound answer she gets to could be described in this poetic way of: the ideal human is the prime mover. And what does she mean by that? Well, so you can think in terms of this book. So if you know anything, might be a little spoilers here for Atlas Shrugged. So if you don't want spoilers, this is the point where you can cut off this conversation. But you will discover in this book that one of the important things that John Galt does in the story is that he is the inventor of a motor. And the motor in itself is a symbol of who John Galt is. There's a beautiful description Ayn Rand gives in her own notes of thinking of John Galt as being energy. He has the energy. Significantly, he is the motor of that energy. He's the self-generated motor, and that was even the kind of sci-fi technology that she was envisioning with the motor that he creates. It's a motor that can generate the energy itself. And it's just a beautiful metaphor for who John Galt is. And there's this concept of motive power that she repeats throughout this book. So the motor is clearly the motive power of the trains that are, for example, like moving Dagny
The machine
Taggart. And
age, yep.
yes, but then she's interested in motive power in this wider sense of what moves the world, what moves a human being. Like, she beautifully describes that, Dagny Taggart had always been the motive power of her own happiness. Or at a certain point, she describes that a moral man's motive power is his moral code. That your moral code is your motive power, your values, your virtues, and such. So there's this question of motive power. And then now, what does that relate to responsibility? So here I think again you get back to, if you look at the beautiful cover of my book and our figure of Atlas. We even, in popular nomenclature, just refer to this book as Atlas. And I think it is very appropriate, because who is Atlas? Atlas is the grand figure who bears the world on his shoulders. He bears responsibility. And what we see throughout the book, what all the heroes are doing, is they are bearing the responsibility to essentially be the motive power. They're bearing the responsibility to create value in the world. So if you think of even how we're introduced to all the different heroes and heroines of the story, when we first are introduced to Dagny Taggart, she's riding on a train, the train suddenly stops, all of the people who are supposed to be running the train are just sitting by idly waiting for someone else to tell them what to do, and Dagny Taggart takes responsibility to make things happen and get things done. Hank Reardon, this is what we see with him, that he's running this impressive steel mill empire and taking responsibility to invent a whole new metal and bring that to the world. They find the remnants of the motor that becomes John Galt's motor, and this becomes a whole other project to find the inventor of the motor. They're constantly taking responsibility for creating value, to bring value into the world, taking that responsibility to be purposefully moving. So this is again the idea of motive power. Ayn Rand in this
Mm,
book describes human life as having these two great attributes, motion and purpose. At one point she even says human life could be defined as purposeful motion. And so that really, I
mm.
think, gets to the heart of what this book is all about, what Ayn Rand thinks a hero is all about. And at this point, I think she is absolutely spot on correct in a way that nobody is talking about as much as they ought to be. That if you were to have to sum up what it means to live a great life, to be a heroic individual, that the one word that would sum it up is responsibility. It is to be an atlas, to be the self generated motor, that motive power that has brings your purposeful motion into the world. That's really what it's all about. So that's like the one word, the one thing is to be an atlas. you know, it, take responsibility. So I just bring this back, and then so again, so this is the way that she even kind of thinks about what it is to be an atlas in this way, to have this motive power, is to be a prime mover, not in the Aristotelian physical sense of some kind of whatever that gets, but the prime mover, this is even, I think, the link to the fountainhead, that the prime mover, that it starts internally. It starts with you being your own self-generated motor. It starts with you making the choice to take responsibility for your own life, to do something with your own life, and then it spreads out from yourself to the world. It takes us back to this question: what moves the world? And the answer is, it ought to be you. Be an atlas. This is what the book is about. It's not about politics. It's not even really about like the mind, if all you think that is thinking in some ivory tower. It's about moving the world. Be an atlas. Be a prime mover. So that's my message for the day. And hopefully it's one that we can keep championing. This idea of being a prime mover, being the motor, taking responsibility. And I want to say, I think it's especially important in our current cultural moment where the exact opposite, so the opposite, so we're differentiation, making the contrast so we can really grasp what the thing is. The opposite of taking responsibility is being the victim and putting the blame on everyone else. And we see in this book even that that's what all the victims do. They're just constantly trying to put the blame on everyone else. I couldn't help it. It doesn't matter if the trains crash as long as, it doesn't fall on me. And it's fascinating that we live in a culture that right now seems to want to lionize victimhood, sadly, when really the key to living a life that is meaningful and fulfilling and happy and produces
Virtuous.
wonderful things for the world is the exact opposite. It is to take responsibility, to not be a victim, but to be an atlas, and to really to be extreme in that way. So hopefully that's part of this message as well.
Thank you for that. That was beautiful. And I guess I would just add to kind of elaborate on, I think your theories here is like, is prime mover responsibility is also kind of her answer for the what is the ideal man, right? What moves?
Yes, I would say that's really so in my sense of the evolution of how this develops, that she starts even as a child uh, being drawn to heroes, individuals who live larger than life, beyond just sort of the routine of everyday life. She's first, inspired by heroes. She lives through the tyranny of the communist revolution and Soviet Russia, and comes to understand the importance of individualism. So then she kind of realizes, okay, the ideal man is this hero, this individualist hero. By the time she gets to the fountainhead, it goes beyond individualism to realizing that it's sort of the creator. And, and all of these things are building upon themselves. And when she really gets to John Galt, yes, he is the hero, individualist creator who is the prime mover, and it's significant that what he does is create a physical motor. He's also the one who, here's your spoiler, starts the strike. He's the one who gets everything started. He is the one who moves the world, and it starts by moving yourself, and it spreads out to the world. And that is, I think, the answer of her vision of what it is to be a hero. And yes, it is to use your mind, but it's not to use your mind like a Robert Stadler in an ivy tower, just thinking up nice theories about science. It is to use your mind to move the world
And move it forward,
and move it forward. Yes.
ultimately, yes. Um, Wonderful. And then I'm curious if you think, because in last week's episode, where we introduced the concept, and even when we described responsibility as a virtue in our own words, we described it as being proudly causal
Yes.
in particular. And we focused really on taking responsibility for one's own life and actions, choices, and then what we kind of framed as both the direct and the indirect consequences of it. So that to me, I mean, it's obviously captured in what you said, but it is also you might say a little bit more narrowly focused on kind of one's individual life. And so I'm curious if to you the kind of appendage of prime mover responsibility, if that to you is meant to evoke or explain something more than just taking responsibility for your choices and actions.
I mean, it's always both. I mean, this is where I think there is the integration with Maslow's observation that self-actualization is self-transcendence. And so the idea of being the prime mover is that it starts with you. You are the prime mover, and it begins with a choice that nothing else really can affect. Even in the most oppressive systems imaginable, when you hear testimonies from people like a Viktor Frankl or a Frederick Douglass, people who lived through the kind of worst tyrannical, oppressive situations humanity has ever faced, recognized that always there's this deep internal choice that the world can tell you you are a slave, but you have that power to resist and to rebel and to say no. And so there's that deep, that's the prime of the prime mover. And so it starts with you. And I think it is important that it involves shaping your own character the way that we've described it. It involves choosing your values, choosing the virtues that you are going to pursue in the world, choosing your mission. And like here, like I know, like I've been thinking a lot about mission in the world. And again, like the key aspect about mission always is taking responsibility, like making this choice to have this purposeful motion in the world. But it starts internally, it starts with you, but in the best instances, it always then ought to ripple outward as well. And be something that ultimately, as this book suggests, moves the world. Move yourself, move the world. And that really is my sense of what it is to be a prime mover. So it's like prime is beautiful in the sense of it's prime in the sense of being like
Refers to the
first,
individual.
but it's prime in the sense of being like ultimate, like it like, is both of
Right.
these.
It has double meanings. You could,
Yes, and there's
yeah,
there's the beautiful poetry of it that I think Ayn Rand was
right.
really, that she herself grasped in borrowing that phrase from Aristotle in a poetic way. But I
Right.
think the tie here to causation is also the key one, and one where I think she is even more aligned with Aristotle in the philosophy, in the sense in thinking in these sort of broad, like existential metaphysical terms. Like it is the question of what moves the world, what is the primary like mechanism of causation. And her beautiful answer is that it starts with you. It starts with you taking responsibility to be someone who will be like a Dagny, a Hank, a Francisco, who will make things happen, get things done, produce things. Like there's the beautiful phrase of like how Dagny and Francisco and Eddie play during their childhood, and it's motive power, motivated by these questions of let's find out, let's make it. And that's her invitation, I would say, to you, to be someone who's constantly asking, like, how do we make it? And then be that person that goes out in the world and takes on that responsibility to make it happen.
Wonderfully said. Yeah, and I do. That's how I kind of think of this concept of prime mover. As it also is that it almost even evokes. Well, it definitely evokes movement, but it evokes this notion of like you're a first cause in a
Yes.
way. That almost is like, I think, a synonymous phrase
Yes.
to
Yep.
prime mover, be a first cause.
Yep.
And then it begs the question, a first cause for what? And it's for yourself and then for the wider world.
Yep.
And even as we've developed this idea of responsibility as the spine of character in our greatness theory, this too is where we have kind of emphasized the prime mover part is that as one becomes a first cause, firstly for themselves, their own thoughts, values, virtues, choices, um, their own power and capacity expands beyond just the ability to live the self-chosen life that you've chosen for yourself and to be a first cause for progress in the wider world. Because you could just think of it, um, as you learn to govern yourself and keep promises, build capability, those powers acquire wider reach such that the knowledge you've gained that can now help solve problems for other people, the courage you have earned and practiced can defend a threatened value of yours, an invention or work of art or other creation that you've made, that just inherently will enlarge the possibility for other people in the world. And so you start to see how being a first cause for your own life values, actions, and then the consequences of those leads into almost naturally and beautifully being a first cause mover in the wider world. And for those of you who have been following along with us and have read our statement, you'll know we talk a lot about our one of our core ideals in philosophical liberalism of the creator trader. And there again, that notion is that what you create, yes, on one level to express your own values and view of the world and to solve a problem or fill a gap that you've identified in the world, but it's also so that you can share your values with others. And so that act even of creating is itself um, already seeking to move the world forward by solving a problem for other people, by bringing in a new vision of what's possible that no one else has seen before and can inspire other people to aspire to it as well. So yeah, I that's another reason why I love the phrase prime mover is for that reason, that it evokes this notion. It to me, it almost has embedded within it this two level responsibility, you might say, that you were talking about.
I think it just connects beautifully with our recognition that the self is both individual and social. And
Right.
to really maximize yourself, you want to be sort of the most individual and the most social. And so, hopefully, this idea of prime mover responsibility is now giving even more concrete direction for how one does this. It's telling you you want to develop your own potential, your own capacities, your own internal world and system, and you want to do that in the world, that that you were born into society, you are a product of the social relation of your parents. You thrive by being born into a family, by having someone who raises you. You embedded within the society, and you reach your full potential then by giving to society the best of yourself, and that self-actualization and self-transcendence ultimately end up being the same thing. And hopefully, again, that is what is captured in this idea of prime mover responsibility and being proudly causal, that you are the cause of yourself and its ripple effects into the world, and that you proudly own that role. That this whole question of what moves the world, and the answer, I mean, so the answer of the book is it's John Galt, but the answer that you should take from it is it ought to be you. Like,
Right.
you ought to be the one who should be moving the world. Like, the world is on your shoulders. You are the Atlas. Bear it, pick it up, do something with it, make it the most that you can. Like,
Yeah.
that is, I think, the call of prime mover responsibility, and then hopefully it's one that we inspire more people to take up.
Yeah, well, and you actually perfectly segued into and even partly stole my thunder of what I wanted to just highlight here is this notion of the other phrase that I like to use is um, taking responsibility to move the world forward. So, and I had actually forgotten about that question as kind of the opener to the, is that the forward, I guess you could say?
Yeah, it's the opening. I mean, because it's
Uh,
interesting, because that question really, I don't think appears
it's not in the
in the
book,
book, but
no,
it
but
is the question that is the question of the book. Like, there's a
right,
reason why this is like,
right,
when you open the page, this is the
yeah,
first thing you see in big letters in this book, and I think it is very appropriate because it really is what
right.
the book. I mean, if her purpose in writing this book was to give you her vision of the ideal human being, she's telling you in this first line what it's about. It's about what moves the world. Who is John Galt? That's what it's about. It's not about politics.
Right.
It's not even about
Or
reason. It's
mind,
about
yeah,
what
or
moves the world.
industrialism, capitalism, yeah, all of
All
that.
those things are matter because they are integral to what moves the world.
Right. Well, and that right there is almost that right there is almost a plug for our opus because we have come to realize even that what started out as our project on freedom and building a free society and will always remain grounded in that, but it's for flourishing and greatness is what we have come to
Yeah.
realize as well. So, but to go back to this idea of taking responsibility for moving the world forward because that question of what moves the world forward, it is individuals taking responsibility, being a first cause.
Yes.
And we talked about progress and order and what we've talked about what moves the world forward and in our own ways have answered it, about with the various ideals we've put forward with the both and integration of the different polarities of human nature at our best and all of these things. But if we really break down about like what are we after, which is a ever growing, more flourishing human society that is just overflowing with freedom, flourishing, and greatness, the way to progress to that is by more individuals taking responsibility. And in the so that is just a that's just a true statement of human life and behavior in general, and it's why even we have come to this notion and understanding of or this appreciation of responsibility being the spine of character. But within the context of even our project and our statement on philosophical liberalism, it has top billing within our 11 list of virtues because we're really saying that this is how we make social change happen. This is how we move politics and the world forward towards a freer society is by each of us taking responsibility for the conditions and the politics that govern our society. And it's there's so many uh kind of truisms and bromides out there about be the change you want to see and all but there is a lot of truth into them, and that's
Yes.
effectively what we're saying here with responsibility. But I'd like to think that by focusing on the virtue of responsibility, it really turns it from a kind of bromide phrase and abstraction into an action plan, like of what, okay, well, what does it mean to, like, it means to take responsibility for what you believe, what you value, what's important, what you're going to do to achieve it, and then go do it, right? And accept what comes of that as well. So And certainly in our vision of more engaged and active and freedom loving individuals helping to build a freer society, this is core to how we do that, is that more of us see that we can't just rely on, oh, someone else, some other activist group, some other, citizen, concerned, engaged citizen is going to take on this responsibility for the society we live in and ensure that I retain my rights and liberties, or that they'll grow over time. It's incumbent upon us. This is what active engagement really means, and this is the tie back to this notion of taking responsibility for moving the world forward, is exactly this, that the world only moves forward by people who take responsibility. So in that sense, I would say that I'm just trying to tie it into why it features in our statement, which is principally concerned with politics, if you will. And the statement's it's
Well,
about a
it's
lot more,
about
but
freedom,
it's
flourishing, and
about freedom,
greatness.
flourishing, and
And it
greatness.
it's
But
it's the core to all of those.
yeah,
And so let's
exactly.
give credit to AI, because it really was AI who came up with the metaphor of the spine, but I think it's spot on, and it's beautiful because it almost ties in with our metaphor of Atlas, because you look, see, when Atlas is shrugged, his spine is bent. But the whole idea of responsibility, the responsibility is literally what keeps you upright. It's the thing that
Right.
I think connects all. I think we're going to see that it's what in a sense connects all the other virtues, because you first need to be that first cause that's going to take responsibility to even bring those other virtues
Yeah, exactly.
into your life. So responsibility is the prime mover. Responsibility, it is the first cause, is of you choosing to take responsibility to make this happen. So there is, I think, a beautiful way in which it is the spine that keeps it upright, that allows you to bear it all, and that connects everything else. So
Yeah. And
hat tip to AI for a beautiful metaphor on that one.
absolutely. And this kids listening at home is one more reason to embrace these new technologies and to
When
use
they work,
when they work. And yes, exactly.
and sometimes they do.
And sometimes they do, and we are going to have a lot more to say on that topic as
Yes.
well as part of this opus. But for those of you who have been following along, even in this Substack, we are big champions of it and ardent users of it, pun intended. For that's an inside joke, but maybe someday some more of you will understand that. Um, and then the other thing I want to just say here is that we talked a lot about it in the last session, but I don't think it hurts to reemphasize it here, which is just that I like to think part of when you first introduced even this notion of prime mover responsibility and the beautiful theory, not even theory, I think it's the reality of what Ayn Rand was doing with her work, in which you've since well documented and proven. But when you first laid out this observation, I'll call it, years ago to me, even framing it in these terms of prime mover responsibility, moving the world forward, motive power, and especially I'm glad you referenced it here because I remember it all those years ago when you first introduced this observation of kind of morality as being man's motive power and all of that. Um, uh, it helped me reframe responsibility, which I do think many people still see as synonymous with duty or burden, into kind of embracing what we called in one of our other episodes as another of our ideals, the self-chosen life. And it ties back to this point about, you say, the first cause or first choice, which is even that's the first choice that freedom makes possible, the choice to think or not, to move forward or not, to take responsibility for your life and the direction it takes. That's what the self-chosen life is about. To me, that is just an amazingly empowering and liberating notion that we all have this choice. And it ties to one of the fundamental aspects that makes us uniquely human, which is that we are volitional, i.e., beings with the power of choice. And so responsibility is almost the spine of morality and character, also because it is about that fundamental choice and just that fundamental nature as choosing beings. So, and I've always, I mean, it's probably why I've always just, even before I ever had the words to identify it, always knew freedom was a core value for human life, is because I grasped this notion of it. So to me, that's just always been empowering. And I think helping people think about responsibility in those terms is what allows you to choose your life and to move the world forward, not just your own life, but the events around you, so that you're not just not only a helpless victim or but also a passive observer or even participant along the ride, in kind of these nebulous global forces or whatever. No, it's you. And so I think that's an important reframing of this concept of responsibility, which is still, I think, in the common colloquial understanding, more associated with duty or obligation.
And interestingly, the opposite of responsibility in that sense, that a lot of people think of responsibility in terms of like what I owe the world, what the world puts on me. The world makes me responsible for these things. Whereas this is the exact opposite. I hopefully even prime mover responsibility captures this idea of you being this first cause, of you having to take up the responsibility to make of yourself and make of your life what it will be, and to make that choice, to take the actions that will transform the world in the direction you want to see it go.
Yeah. And the only other thing I think worth pointing out here is that we've said it many times and we will probably come back to it many other times, but having choice over your life, building a self-chosen life, taking responsibility, and being a prime mover, all of these things, they don't assume that you have total control over things, nor that you should strive for that as like an ideal. All it means is that, again, you choose consciously, ideally, what it is you want in life, what it is you believe, what actions you're going to take to get those and to manifest those, and then the consequences of those thoughts and actions. And then that you therefore deal with whatever comes in life, both the things that are in your control and then the things that you can't control. And so, it's not to suggest that this is like the shortcut or like the keystone to having total control over your life. Not at all. I just like to think of it as, by taking responsibility, you um I just lost my train of thought. You you at least know how to respond to what happens, and you don't just sit back and like let things happen to you, nor do you wallow in the effects that events, people, your own actions have in your life. That you always kind of find that spine again to make a choice, even in how you respond to whatever happens to you, and to realize that I have a choice in this matter. So I think that also is an important nuance to this virtue that people need to understand, is that, and that's going to be true for all of these virtues, for morality and character in general. And we're going to talk a lot about more. There will be a lot more we have to say on this in our opus when it comes out, but um, is just this notion that it's never about this kind of Platonic ideal of perfection or um, lack of flaws and kind of omniscience and infallibility, but it's more about these are the tools, the habits, the values that can help us take more control of our life, and then to respond to whatever happens in it in a positive, productive, and ultimately ever growing, progressive way.
Yeah, I think it's important to even so I have two things that I really want to say about this. I want to make a strong case and then put the guardrails on. So I want to make the strong case first. So it's the Serenity prayer or poem, which tells us that you should accept the things that you don't have control over and have courage to change the things that you do have control over. And wisdom is in knowing the difference, and so much of wisdom is in learning the difference. And one of the interesting things is that I think this virtue of responsibility asks you to lean into taking more control. And there's even like a beautiful, it reminds me of a beautiful passage in this book where one point one of the villains is saying about Hank Reardon that sometimes the effect of like, well, he never notices me, but he would notice me if I like bashed him over the head with a club. And Reardon's wife Lillian, who herself is a villain, points out quite accurately that, well, what Reardon would do is blame himself for not getting out of the way of the club. And I think I mean, it's somewhat facetious, but it gets to a really important point. And so I want to say first that, if someone were to bash you over the head with a club, that is on them, and you should definitely sue them and take them to court for all that they are worth. And this idea that you should be focused on what is in your control, like your actions of moving out of the way of the club. Like, it's an extreme version of this, but that is what you want to lean into. And I think the focus here, and why it's always motive power and energy and action, is because it's precisely the things that are within your control to do. So interestingly, I think a lot of people, even unfortunately, spend a lot of time, sometimes even blaming themselves or taking responsibility for things that they maybe had no control over, or things that were in the past. Like, think of all like the sad cases of like children who feel responsible when their parents get a divorce, which probably wasn't even their fault at all, but it can haunt them for years. And if you're now a grown adult, like, there's nothing you can do for things in the past. The importance here, I think, is to recognize, even in these extreme situations, what sphere of action is open to you, and to really lean into those things where you have control. So someone else may be coming to bash you over the head with a club, but you have control to recognize that, respond to that, move to that. And that is the thing that is within your sphere. And that's the thing that you really should be focused on. Now, that said, and even with all this emphasis on action and such, I also want to point out that, taking responsibility shouldn't mean taking over responsibility. Like, part
Mm,
of being responsible is being responsible about your responsibility.
right. What your
to,
part is, your
yes,
proportion, you might say. Yeah.
exactly. Like, so even though, I do believe that most humans do not take on as much responsibility as they can or as they ought to. That this does not mean that you should overburden yourself. You should aim to stretch yourself, that what is within your control is probably more than you are allowing. And it's something that, like I will say, I think about and find challenging, as a challenge that I come up against time and time again. And you want to be responsible for your own self-care, for your own boundaries, for your own renewal. That if you want to be a person with boundless energy, you have to prioritize sleep. Like, I will say, from my work in coaching and working with high performers, this is almost like the number one lesson, that people like us who are entrepreneurs, who like to take on responsibility, who like to get things done, we have a tendency sometimes to not prioritize sleep. And sometimes one of the most important things, the like number one, if there was like a one hack that you might want to try that might actually make the difference to give you more energy, it's not to stay up all night and
Get more sleep.
burn
Yeah.
yourself out on caffeine. It's to get sleep. You should get, most adults need 7 to 8 hours of sleep, if not more. And if you make that a priority, you'll probably find that you actually have more energy for taking on more responsibility. So part of being responsible is being responsible for your own self-care. So I think that's like an important guardrail to put on this. But with all those guardrails, I also do want to suggest that I do think that most people can be and ought to be taking on more responsibilities. And I do think that's even one of the beautiful things in this book, for the disagreements that I do have with it. One of the things that I do think is beautiful and inspiring is just, you think about, what Danny and Hank and Francisco and John Galt, like, what they are taking on responsibility to do and to make happen. I mean, they literally start a strike to try to
To
transform the
save the
culture that
world.
they live in.
Yeah.
Yes, so they are actively acting on the scope of trying to move the world. That is the sphere of action. And it was the sphere of action that Ayn Rand clearly was working on. She wrote this book to try to change the world. And I do think that you're beyond the bromides. That is something that we all ought to be doing. Sometimes we get so bogged down in the responsibilities of our day-to-day lives, and we should take those responsibilities seriously, and we should get lots of sleep, and we should be thinking about how we can also move the world.
Well, and that in and of itself is a great plug for our Opus on Greatness, because that is a recurring theme, is we how even greater greatness of all human beings' potential is in cultivating yourself, seeking wider impact beyond yourself, and getting lots of sleep and balance.
Yes.
So I think that's a wonderful way to kind of even just capstone this. And I'll just even quote from a passage in our opus, and just how, as we go from self-responsibility to world responsibility, the question rises and evolves from how do I take charge of my life to what am I capable of taking responsibility for in the world? And that is certainly the theme of everything else that's to come in our virtues here, and the ideal we're trying to put forth in that statement about engaged and active citizenship, and how we can move the world forward towards a more free society. So, um, and
And a
as
greater society, a
a,
society of
and a
greatness,
freer
freedom,
society and a
flourishing,
system
and greatness.
of exactly. And to Joya's last point, it doesn't mean we all have to take on the burden of single-handedly that the outcome of American society and government, or global culture, is going to be is on our shoulders, but in
It
another way.
is.
But it is and it isn't. Yeah, like it isn't in the sense of like, don't, like, I think too many people actually are making the error right now of thinking they have more impact than they actually do, at least in the way in which they're engaging with politics. And that's why they're going neurotic over it, because it's all consuming them, but they're not like necessarily channeling it productively. But that's a whole nother discussion. But um it's just not, like, obviously something as grand as global politics is outside of any one individual's control. However, as that book, Atlas Shrugged, I think beautifully demonstrates, if one chooses to be a prime mover for not only themselves, but the wider world in which you live, you can and ought to, if you have a strong vision of what it can be a prime mover to help change the world for that. And so, and we are certainly not advocates for lowering one's ambitions. So I'm not to suggest that one shouldn't aim to change the world positively, but it just means understanding this concept, kind of this nuance of like, don't take on an unneeded or kind of impossible burden or responsibility, but also
But push the boundaries of
push
what
the
is possible.
boundaries of what's possible. Thank you. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Yep. So, on that note, we will see you all in a few weeks, where we will move into our second virtue.
Yep. See you then.
Till then, bye.